right now, we feel like he gives us the best chance to win. And that's what we're trying to do, win every game that we have on our schedule starting this week with the Giants.
Buccaneers offensive coordinator Todd Monken, and we'll see if he's calling the plays again this Sunday against the New York Giants, talking about Ryan Fitzpatrick once again being the Bucs starter. We'll delve into the quarterbacks. We'll delve into who's calling plays and so much more in our pewterpirates.com podcast, A Few Extra Bucs. We appreciate you hopping on, really picking up steam since we launched this back in June, and really excited about what we've built here at pewterpirates.com and A Few Extra Bucs podcast. First, I'd like to thank our title sponsors, House of Brews and Lutz on the corner of Northdale Mabry and Van Dyke, and Sea Dog Brewing Company, two great locations, Treasure Island and Clearwater. Treasure Island on the beach. Great brews, great food, great service. I'm going to bring in our esteemed producer, Justin Thomas, and our Buccaneer insider and longtime beat writer for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Roy Cummings. And Roy, I was at Great American Teach-In today with my daughter who's in 8th grade, okay? And I've done these teach-ins since she was in 4th grade. And I love taking the poll every year, and I say you can only vote for one. Who's your team? Show of hands, Lightning, Rays, or Bucs. And I got to say, the Lightning always win, and it alternates between who's last, the Rays or the Bucs. I did 2 classes today, and in 2 classes, the Bucs may have had 4 votes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, oh man, how the mighty have fallen, huh?
Well, I mean,
in
these kids' lifetime, though, the Lightning have been winners, and let's face it, the Bucs have been losers.
You're right, and like I said, people are just over this team. They're fed up, man. It's been 10 years of this, 5 different coaches, the same results all the time. It's annoying. It's hard. I get it. It's hard to watch. It's hard for you and I to go to the games and cover them because it's. And I look, I don't care who wins necessarily, but I don't want to see bad football either. And just ultimately, that's what you end up seeing. You end up seeing bad football, and it's just confounding. Again, I continue to use that word, how it keeps happening to this team over and over again, no matter who the coach is, no matter who they bring in free agency, no matter who they draft, no matter who the kicker is. It's the same thing over and over again. It is incredible. You would think that at some point along the line, one of these coaches or one of these, groups of free agents or one of these draft classes or one of these kickers would change everything, and it hasn't happened.
Yeah, I think it's amazing though, because when you get older, you see other generations, and it puts into perspective though. I mean, a kid that was born around 2005 in Tampa has never seen a playoff victory.
Now that's putting it in perspective.
Yes.
That's really amazing. We're going through, you know what you're talking about. I mean, I don't know how they define generations of fans, but you're working on a full generation of fans there.
Yes, that's exactly my point. I mean, you know what? The Bucs need to think about that, because conversely, the Rays have done a good job about actually making the playoffs, going over 500, and, they don't do a good job of keeping players around. But at some point, you're going to really the fan base is going to be hit hard if one generation you just completely whiff on them. And that's what's happening.
Yeah, it's hard to build a new fan base. And I think, Mike, I think that's a big problem about why we see such a sparse showing of Bucs fans every Sunday. I mean, look, I don't know what I could look them up, and I'm sure they put, 58,000 or something like that down as the attendance numbers and all that stuff. We know better. It's more like, 45,000 at best. And I mean that at best. Last week, I wouldn't have guessed any more than, 38 to 40,000 fans in that building. And at least half of them were wearing the other team's uniform again. And that's not unusual, but when the fan base goes from, 65, 68,000 to 38, 40,000, and it's still the same thing, part of that is a lack of new fans, being generated. And the fan base is not growing. It's dying. It's dwindling. And you know what? And you saw it for sure as well there too. We saw it at training camp, where this year, it didn't help that the Buccaneers decided during training camp to basically only have about 5 open practices, and then they took away the stands, made it even more inconvenient for the fans to come and watch, and things like that. And we saw, instead of seeing that literally, 3,000-4,000 fans at a practice on a Saturday, we saw 300 or 400, and so it's a dwindling fan base, and it's something I think that the owners really have to think about. They've got to build this fan base back up, and I think it starts with public relations and community relations and fan relations, because that's something you can control. It's not an appealing afternoon at the ballpark, and that's a bad thing, and they got to work on that.
All right, let's cut to the chase. And before we cut to the chase, Justin has just put a bunch of sound in for us. And Justin, watching Dirk Koetter's press conference, watching Ryan Fitzpatrick's, boy, it's just not. Like Roy says, we're not, we're objective here. But boy, man, this is just monotonous stuff every week. It's really become that way.
Yeah, it really feels like a team that's just trying to get through the rest of the year. If they can get a win, great. But obviously their expectations are gone now, if anything, postseason. So
let's talk about the quarterbacks because, it's the storyline every week, Roy. Let's face it. It's the big story. I really think, and I've gone back and forth, and I know I don't, I'm not the Glazers. I don't have to pay all the money. We've talked about the contract and whatever. I think you got to go Jameis Winston at this point. I just think you have him play the rest of the year. How do you feel?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. You know what you're going to get out of Ryan Fitzpatrick. You're still not completely sure what you're going to get out of Jameis Winston. You might have a pretty good idea, but I think he also deserves the opportunity at this point to prove that he's not the guy that got benched, that he can play the kind of football that he played at the end of last year that we saw during training camp and preseason. I'd like to see that. The reason I think, and first of all, there's two things here. First of all, number one, there's no question Dirk Koetter's job is on the line. He knows it. And I think the most disturbing thing about this, guys, is that Dirk Koetter knows his job is on the line, and he's turning to Ryan Fitzpatrick to help him save it. That to me is disturbing. It's disturbing for Jameis Winston. It's disturbing for Dirk Koetter. It's disturbing for the Buccaneers. And the other thing I think, and this maybe takes the edge off of that a little bit, I honestly think that maybe what's going on here, well, the reason that he's going with Ryan Fitzpatrick is because maybe he thought, you know what, out of the 2 quarterbacks I've got, let's say that they're the same guy, all right? Because you can make that argument that, I think it's in 4 starts now. In his last 4 starts, Ryan Fitzpatrick is winless, and I think he's got 9 turnovers in that span. So Jameis Winston had 5 starts or whatever, and he had 10 turnovers. So they're the same guy. Okay, so if you think they're the same guy, and you decide to go with Ryan Fitzpatrick in this particular game, I've already said that I think part of that might be that they still haven't seen on the practice field what they want to see necessarily out of Jameis Winston. They want him to take another step forward and be a little bit more consistent, show a little bit better improvement in the mechanics and stuff. But maybe the other thing here is that Dirk Koetter's thinking, you know what, I really need to win a game. We need to turn this thing around, whether I save my job or not. We need to win a game. You know who gives me the best chance to win a game? In New York, in crappy weather. You know who's got something to show those people? Is Ryan Fitzpatrick. Ryan Fitzpatrick can go back to New York and feel comfortable in the building, no matter what the weather's like. Be pissed off that I'm going to show you sons of guns. This is, I could play at this for this team, or I could play in this city for the other team wearing green. And I think maybe that's what he's thinking is, it's a comfort thing, that here's a guy who's going to go back to New York, feel almost like it's a home game for him. And number 2, he's got an edge about him that says, I want this game. I want this game in this Giants stadium because I want to show everybody they made a mistake in letting me go in the first place. Maybe that's part of what the deal is here.
Yeah, I'd love to be a fly on the wall when Dirk Koetter and Jason Light talk about Jameis Winston, because that's Jason Light's guy for so long. But obviously those 2 guys, their jobs are on the line. You mentioned Ryan Fitzpatrick, though. When he was a New York Jet back in 2015, he had his best season as a pro. He had 31 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. But then the next year, typical Fitz magic, he had 12 touchdowns, 17 interceptions, lost his job. Fitz talked this week, though, about the stadium, MetLife Stadium, and returning up there and the advantage that will be for him.
Local knowledge helps. So if there is wind or anything like that, it's stuff that I've been in that stadium with and dealt with before. So that's not gonna hurt to have played that many games in that stadium. But it's a neat place to play. It was a great 2 years of my life living there, meeting a lot of different people, a lot of great relationships.
Just what you said, Roy. He has a comfort level there. I hadn't thought about your theory, and I think we both agree they need to get a look-see at Winston, especially down the stretch. But Fitzpatrick seems to agree with you too.
Yeah, I think that has something to do with it, and it might just be Dirk Koetter trying to catch lightning in a bottle again, or thinking that hey, I mean they throw out that cliche all the time. This guy gives us the best chance to win. In this case, there may be something to that. I mean, maybe he really does, in that environment, give the Buccaneers the best chance to win. I don't have a problem with it if that's the call. If maybe and look, if he plays and earns the spot to stay on board as the starter, great. But it could be that he continues to play the way he has the last couple of weeks, and maybe you end up seeing Jameis Winston at halftime or something. So we'll see. But yeah, it does kind of confirm my theory there a little bit.
Well, another part of your theory that's very accurate as well. I mean, think of Jameis Winston the last time he played in cold weather, Cincinnati. That didn't work out well either. And you look at the schedule coming up. I mean, it's favorable in a lot of ways. I'm not sure how good Carolina is, but then you have San Francisco on the horizon. So if Fitz struggles at all places in a place he's comfortable with, maybe it's more of a natural move. So I think that's a good point. All kinds of ups and downs for Ryan Fitzpatrick this year. And this is how he's approached it, just like he's approached really his whole career.
Playing for as long as I have, I've had a lot of those moments on both sides, and you just got to go to work and keep grinding. And a big thing I think in this league is people having confidence in you and you not losing confidence in yourself. And I've never lost confidence in myself, and it's nice to have the support of whether it be coach or linemen or receivers or whoever it is. Having that support from your team is always a good thing.
Ryan Fitzpatrick, 7 different stops in the NFL, 190 touchdowns, 145 interceptions. He's seen it all, Roy. And, we've always liked his mindset, but I think you're onto something maybe with this road trip here. But, boy, if things don't go well up there, I can't imagine them not going to Winston after that.
Yeah, it wouldn't make any sense to me. Look, even if he's not your future, if you've decided that, and I don't think they have, I think you have to go to him because, again, at the end of the day, I think he's the best quarterback on the team, Jameis Winston. And I think he needs the experience. How many times has Dirk Koetter said, experience is the best teacher? Well, here's your opportunity to live by that credo, and he's not doing it. So, still a little curious. I think I might be on, believe it or not, I think I actually might be onto something here with my theory on Fitzpatrick. But yeah, if we see the same thing out of Ryan Fitzpatrick, again, even for a half, and the game is close, going into that second half, I'll be surprised if we don't start to see more Jameis Winston. Well,
the red zone was definitely the dead zone for the Buccaneers against the Washington Redskins, and we're going to hear from Todd Monken about that. He was pretty honest talking to the media this week.
Stinks. I mean, it's execution. It wasn't anything about the plan, who's calling the plays. Made way too much of that. We didn't execute well enough. That's me, that's our staff, that's our players. We didn't execute well enough. That's what it comes down to. We had plenty of opportunities, as we've had all year. That was just what came up on Sunday, and it's frustrating.
You mentioned play calling. We talked about this in our last podcast, Roy, but, it's quarterbacks, it's the defense sucks, it's play calling, repeat, rinse, whatever with this Buccaneer team. Does it matter? Why did Dirk say it last week after the loss? Was he protecting Monken? I mean, what do you read into all this stuff with the play calling?
I still think that at the end of the day, I think Dirk Koetter decided that if I'm going down, I'm going down doing it my way. I'm going to earn my departure. In other words, if I'm going to go down, I'm going to be in control of my own demise, and it's not going to be somebody else. But I also believe what he said, and to me, it makes a lot of sense. And these are the things. Look, with all due respect to the fans, a lot of them are very knowledgeable, but sometimes you got to listen to what the coach is saying and just take it, at face value before you start, being critical. I think there was a lot to what Dirk Koetter said about, I wanted to call the plays because, number one, I wanted to have a little bit more control over what we did, in terms of helping out the defense, getting them off giving them a little bit more time to rest, things like that. Maybe Todd is more of a pass happy guy, and maybe one thing that Dirk has discovered during his time with Todd Monken calling plays is that he's a little bit too anxious to quit on the running game, which has to be a part of things here. A little bit too anxious to lean on the passes, and maybe he just wanted a little bit more control, and like he said, to help out that defense a little bit. And you know what? As I said before, it worked. I said that in a previous podcast as well. If that was truly the case, well, guess what? It worked. So before we start, and look, I wrote immediately after the game. It's still up on pewterpirates.com. You can go back and look at my rapid reaction to the loss, this 16-3 loss to the Redskins. I said it right then and there. This is not about who called the plays. This is all about poor execution of the plays that were called by the players on the field. No coach calls for interceptions in the red zone, calls for drop passes in the red zone, calls for a center to snap the ball past his quarterback's ear in the red zone. That stuff just isn't, it doesn't happen. And there was nothing wrong with the play designs on the plays where the mistakes were made. Players were open. I don't think Ryan Fitzpatrick did a real good job of finding the best option on those plays, which is another reason why I'm a little surprised he's going to start this week. But it came down to, as Todd Monken said, execution. End of story. Execution. And the bottom line here, guys, I don't think it matters who calls the plays. I think Dirk Koetter is a very good play caller, and I think Todd Monken has proven to be a pretty good play caller himself. I don't think it matters who calls the plays, because if the plays aren't, and we did this with defense, if the plays are not executed properly, it doesn't matter who calls them. They're never going to look right.
Here's my only question, I guess, when you talk about that, if it doesn't matter. And we've talked about Dirk Koetter being a great offensive coordinator, great guy calling plays, but maybe not a great head coach. The fact that Monken can call plays, does that make Koetter a better head coach, because that's one less thing he has to worry about?
You would like to think that maybe that would be the case, but we haven't really seen it, have we?
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, we haven't seen it. Look, I feel bad saying this, because I think Dirk Kutter's given it every shot he could. I just don't think Dirk Koetter is a head coach. I think he's 59 years old. He spent his entire career concentrating almost solely on one thing: creating an offensive scheme, running that offense on Sundays, calling the plays. And now all of a sudden he's got all these other things he's got to worry about. He's got to worry about the defense. He's got to worry about, whether we try an onside kick here, or whether we try a fake punt at our own 26-yard line. These things take away from what you do really well. And I think as a head coach, I just don't think he's a good head coach. I think he's a darn good and an excellent offensive coordinator and offensive play caller. But as a head coach, I think he may have met his match. And I think he knows that too. And I think that's part of the reason why we see him looking so down.
I guess I should have phrased that. In theory, you would think that would be one less thing, but he hasn't proven that it helps him at all. So maybe, I don't know. It's just this as the Bucs turn, the quarterbacks, the defense, the play calling, blah, 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 blah. I mean, it's just every friggin' week. And then you had the red zone deal last week, which is another anomaly for this team. I'm still amazed that this is the number one offense in the NFL, the number one passing offense in the NFL, and yet they score 3 points when they have over 500 yards. Here's Ryan Fitzpatrick on the red zone woes.
It was a weird feeling after the game, because there were so many things that were so good from the 20 to the 20, that we did and executed. So it was a tough one to get over, but, something you have to take a hard look at and try to learn from, and why did it happen, and you move on, and this is a whole new week and a whole new defense that presents different challenges.
As excited as Ryan Fitzpatrick gets after throwing deep balls and touchdowns, boy, press conferences, man, he is one cool cat. I feel like sometimes he should just come out smoking or something like that. I mean, that guy is just – you could ask him, hey, Ryan, you're really a bad quarterback. Well, some days I'm not that good, and some days I'm pretty – I mean, the guy, he's unflappable, man. He is.
Yeah, he really is. And again, you know what? That's something that I think Jameis Winston can learn from him is – how to just kind of, dial it down a little bit here and there, because every week things change. There's no, look, you got every reason in the world to be happy and have some fun with it when you win, as he did. But when you lose, you can't get too down on yourself. It's a tough league to win in. It's a tough league to score points in, as the Bucs found out. And usually you go back and you look and you say, my gosh, because again, these physical mistakes that were made last week that cost them all the opportunities to score. They're all correctable. That's that to me, that's the encouraging thing is, I mean, you really don't expect Ryan Fitz. Well, I guess maybe you do to some degree, but you don't expect all the things that happened in the red zone of this team last week to happen in the red zone of this team every week.
All right, we're going to start a new thing. We are objective, Roy and Justin. We are objective. But how about this? When you cover a team with the Buccos right now, 3-6, they've lost 3 straight. They have 1 win basically in the last 2 months. How about a good news segment of a Few Extra Bucs podcast? This is the good news portion of your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We're going to start with Chris Godwin. A week ago was Adam Humphries leading the way with the receivers against Washington Redskins. It was Chris Godwin who had a big day. In our good news segment, here's Mr. Happy Dirk Koetter talking about how good Chris Godwin has been.
Outstanding. I mean, really, really good football player, dependable, can play every position, does a lot of the dirty work, can make plays when he's asked to. He doesn't have to be our number 1 right now, but I think Chris Godwin can be a number 1 receiver in this league.
How about that, Roy?
Yeah, I'm not surprised him saying that. I've been thinking for a while now, watching him this season in particular. This kid's got number 1 ability. There's no doubt about it. It's why I think they could have traded Deshaun Jackson and not felt the any ill effects from it.
Should have.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have that speed, but he's got everything else.
Yeah,
and he's pretty fast anyway. So, yeah, the Bucs are just blessed with an abundance of talent at the wide receiver position, and that's a good thing. And look, everybody, this was a team. Remember back? This is what's so crazy about the Buccaneers. Remember back in the day when they couldn't score points, when they didn't have any weapons,
right?
And
right.
Now you've got more weapons and you know what to do with. They score points most of the time. Like they're coming out of their ears, and the defense can't stop anybody, which is why it was just absolutely crazy that last week all of a sudden the defense stopped somebody and they can't score points. But it wasn't because of Chris Godwin. That kid can play, and you know what? Again, I think we've lost sight of some of the good things about this team. And again, this is one of the reasons why everybody's quick to fire Jason Light and Dirk Koetter. Don't forget, guys, this offense, which is one of the top 2 offenses in the NFL in yards, points, just overall production, Jason Light built that offense, and Dirk Koetter designed the attack and basically, has been calling the plays along with Todd Monken. Right now, this team is a couple of tweaks away defensively, primarily, and a kicker from being the competitive team that we all thought they could be. And it's because of the talent that they've built on the offensive side of the ball. It's why, I guess I would be surprised if Dirk Koetter kept his job, but I could also see a justification for it because, well, look, what more do you want out of an offense, which is what he does. So if you could just get a coordinator, a defensive coordinator in there who's got a scheme, and again, the Bucs aren't the only team in the NFL trying to figure things out defensively. That's happening all over the country.
Everywhere.
In fact, ESPN, Sports Illustrated has a Futures edition coming out. I believe it's this week.
It's
and
on
one
my
of their articles.
right now, right?
One of their articles is about the future of defense in football. that there's some real crazy schemes being developed where basically it's like positionless defense, where you've got guys who are built like safety / linebackers, and they're putting more of those guys on the field and just basically bouncing them around to different spots to take advantage of their athleticism. It's not your standard 3-4-4-3 scheme anymore. And it's sooner or later, as my guess is, the way things are going, it could catch fire. The Bucs need something to catch fire on that side now. But again, yeah, Chris Godwin is at the top of a list of a lot of several, I won't say a lot, but several good things about this football team that people should be excited about and can be excited about.
All right. Well, Dirk Koetter, if you're listening, we have one more good news note before we get to 3 and Out. I'm really excited about 3 and Out. I think we have some good thought-provoking questions this week. So you got to kind of lock in here, Roy and Justin. All right. Kicking. I always want to mispronounce the new kicker's name. It's Cairo Santos, but I want to call him Cairo because it's Cairo, Georgia. I used to cover their high school football team back in the day in Tallahassee, but who cares about that? I just want to throw that out there. Cairo Santos apparently off in kicking so far. Here's what Dirk Koetter had to say about his early workouts this week.
He made all of his kicks yesterday, and then they went over to the stadium and kicked some. I think he kicked 35 field goals yesterday. It was something like 32 out of 35. And so that's a good start.
These kickers are driving Koetter crazy, aren't they, Roy?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they are. They've been driving him crazy since he got here, man. No doubt about it. And, it's just – and, hey, that's great. He made all his kicks yesterday, went over to the stadium, kicked 32 out of 35. Great. Show me on Sunday. I'm over it, man. Just show me on Sunday. And again, a lot of people think, they live in a vacuum. They think this is only a problem with the Buccaneers. Look around the NFL. There's kickers all over all across the map struggling to make extra points and field goals. Something's happened to the kickers, and I honestly think it's a bit of a head situation. The whole thing about moving the extra point back. Yeah. Playing with their heads. I honestly think that's it. To me, there's no other, logical solution or conclusion to come to, because it's kind of really been ever since that happened. We've seen a lot of issues with kickers all across the league.
No doubt about it. And, the thing about Santos, he probably has the best resume of anybody they brought in since they got rid of Matt Bryant. It's almost like when you go to college and you have class with the same people. I love Santos explaining all these tryouts. Like, he's played golf with Kent and Zaro. You run into these guys all the time. It's like the same 5 guys trying out for teams when a kicker starts struggling in the NFL. That'd be a great behind the scenes story. We never get the access, but it's amazing how you always have like the handful of veteran kickers every year, and they're all in airports together, probably hanging out, with all these tryouts. It's amazing.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, it's a fraternity all its own, and you're right. They probably all spend a lot of time wishing each other luck as they bounce around from one tryout to the next, and hope that they're the one getting a call a week later or the day or the next day or whatever it is.
All right. Well, we talk Bucs as much as we can, and we tried the good news segment. They're not going to be long ones, but we're going to try to get them in every week. Hopefully there'll be more good news for the Bucs. I'm not a homer here, but man, it gets monotonous talking about this football team. But Justin, you know what time it is. I always learn something about Roy Cummings and Justin Thomas in our 3 and Out segment. 3 questions, and we're out of here. Kind of like these a little bit. I think we have a very good combination of Bucs, NFL, and, of course, pop culture at the end. Our first question in our 3 and Out, who has been better, Jason Light or Mark Dominic? And keep in mind, Roy, if the Bucs go 3-4 the rest of the year, which could very well happen, how about this? Jason Light and Mark Dominic will have the same record as general manager, 28-52.
Wow. First of all, it's an incredible stat. I guess it's not hard to believe. I thought Mark Dominic was actually a pretty good general manager. I think he had a good eye for talent, to be honest. But I think I'm going to give the edge to Jason Light, and here's why. Mark Dominic is the guy who picked up. These are some names that look, he's the one who turned DeMar Dotson from a college basketball player into a right tackle. Okay, he's the guy who thought Donald Penn could play in the NFL when a lot of other people didn't. He's also the guy who let Matt Bryant go. So that hurts you a little bit. I think Mark Dominic made some pretty ballsy moves as general manager of the Bucs. And I think a lot of them were pretty good moves. They obviously didn't work out. But I think Jason Light has done a little bit better job of actually finding the diamonds in the rough. The Adam Humphreys, for example, those kind of guys. I think he's picked up a few more of those in a shorter time at this point. And I like what he, look, I think he made the right call on Jameis Winston, Mike Evans, etc. I like some of his draft picks. Some of them haven't worked. I didn't have a problem with Roberto Aguayo, a team that had struggled as this team had at the kicking position. You went and drafted the best kicker in college football history, 4 spots ahead of where you knew a team was going to take him if you didn't. And that's something that nobody wants to ever admit, is that they never would have got him in the 3rd round. It just wasn't. They never would have got him if they traded down in the 2nd round, unless they traded down 2 spots. So another team was going to take Roberto Aguayo, and they knew it. So I'm going to give Jason Light the edge here because right now he's got a number 1 offense on his hands, and he's the one who put that one together with through trades, drafts, and just picking guys up off the street. So I'll give it to Jason Light right now.
All right, I love your perspective because you've covered this team for a long time. But against Jason Light, can't you make this case for Mark Dominic that they didn't spend as much money when Mark Dominic was general manager, especially when Raheem was in there? And then, you could debate Winston. You can debate it because Mariota seems to be picking up steam, and Mariota didn't get in trouble off the field. And to me, that's the GM and head coach, then Lovie Smith's job to really get to know these guys off the field. And that 2016 draft, the Vernon Hargraves, the Noah Spences, that's almost a lost draft, Roy, really.
Yeah, it's starting to look that way. I don't know what's going on with Noah Spence. That's a mystery. Why he can't get on the field when this defense is struggling the way it is, even to rush the passer. Don't get it. The Aguayo move, that's not working out. Obviously didn't work out. Yeah, you're right. There's no question. But I for every one of those, there's a Chris Godwin, for example. And there's a Kendall Beckwith, and there's a Quan Alexander. I think he's done a pretty good job overall.
What do you think about the offensive linemen he drafted? Do you think they're elite? Do you think they're good picks? Over time, have they been exposed a little bit, Jason Light?
Well, I think Ali Marpet is a Pro Bowl bound player. I think he'd probably be a Pro Bowler now if he just stayed at right guard. He's Pro Bowl caliber. Donovan Smith, I think, is a very serviceable. Certainly, he's a very durable left tackle, which is very important. Number 2, he's good enough that the Bucs, and this is something the Bucs fans and even analysts, a lot of them, tend to forget. Donovan Smith is left out on an island on his own against the best athlete, arguably the best pass rushers in the NFL every Sunday, all day long, because the Bucs consistently send 5 targets out in their passing game. And, you've seen how, they do the same pretty much with their running backs. They play a lot of empty backfield and one back, sets and things like that. And that tight end is chipping at best if he's not just flat going out. And so Donovan Smith is forced to do a lot of things on his own. And he's been sturdy and durable. He's not going to be 100%. No left tackle is. And a lot of times those pressures, sometimes, quarterbacks can avoid those if they've got that clock in their head. So I think actually he's done a pretty good job with the line. Look, nobody complained about picking up Ryan Jensen when they did it.
Right.
He picked up Evan Smith many years back, and he's been very serviceable. He paid DeMar Dotson. Certainly aren't going to argue with that. So, I think he's done a pretty good job.
I think Jason Light's best move, one of his best, was JPP. That was a great find in the offseason. And we talked about how great he was in training camp. That's definitely carried over. All right, Justin, I'm going to bring you in for the last 2. Our second question and our 3 and out. Brandon Marshall was signed by the Saints. this week. Des Bryant, obviously, that was a tragedy what happened with the Achilles, or unbelievable chain of events in New Orleans last week. But remarkably, Brandon Marshall, it's his 13th year in the NFL, guys. He's never played in a playoff game before. I want to give you 3 names besides Brandon Marshall. Who would you say is the greatest player in NFL history to never have played in a playoff game? And I think my research is right on these guys. You have Joe Thomas of the Cleveland Browns, who will be a future Hall of Famer, offensive lineman. Archie Manning, never played in a playoff game. Not a Hall of Famer, but, man, if he wasn't with those brutal Saints teams, it would have been interesting to see what kind of career he had. And how about Dick Butkus, never played in a playoff game with the Chicago Bears? How about that?
I grew up watching Dick Butkus, and I will take Dick Butkus because he was the best, man. He was as good a middle linebacker as there was. He and Ray Nitschke, that was like, man, oh, man, watching those 2 guys when the Packers would play the Bears back in the day, you're watching 2 of the greatest players in the history of the game for sure, and no matter the position. But I'll take Dick Butkus because the guy, you know, again, it's just unfortunate. His career basically gone to waste in Chicago by a lot of bad players around him. Those Chicago teams were horrific, but he was special, man. He was absolutely great. He elevated that team to a level that didn't quite make him competitive, but he was worth the price of the ticket.
Justin, what do you got?
I like Joe Thomas. I think he's probably one of the best to play at his position. He was with the same team his whole career. Like you said, he's definitely going to be a Hall of Famer. He also seems like a really great person, so it's just a shame he never got to play in a playoff game. So
I'll give you another name I could have thrown in there, but I think we may have all picked this guy. Gale Sayers also didn't play in a playoff game. To me, he's like he's like Ernie Banks. You know, Ernie Banks played for those dreadful Cubs teams for years.
There you go. Imagine that. You're in Chicago, and your Bears team has Dick Butkus on one side,
yeah,
and you've got Gale Sayers on the other. You think you're a playoff team, right? And that's back in the day when there weren't a whole bunch of teams. So theoretically, maybe a little bit easier to get to the playoffs, even though they didn't have wild cards and stuff. But what the heck, huh? What the heck?
Yeah, no kidding, man. That's brutal. I remember when Reggie Bush was drafted in New Orleans, they said he'd be the next kind of Gale Sayers, and it didn't work out. Not that Reggie had a bad career, but that guy was special, man. There was nobody really like him that's played in the NFL for a number of reasons. All right, we go pop culture in our third question, our 3 and out. And I thought this would be a short podcast, man, but we're almost 40 minutes now. I appreciate you sticking around. And if you stuck around this long, this is often the most exciting part of the podcast, our pop culture part. I'm just throwing this out there, guys, in terms of comedies recently, and this century, I guess. And which is your favorite of these 3? All right, Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm, or The Office?
Wow, man, that's a tough one.
You like that? I didn't know how that would fly with you. And I always learn something about you, Roy, so I'm going to learn something about you with this one.
Wow. Well, look, my feeling is that I think the greatest television sitcom of all time was in the top 3. The Dick Van Dyke Show.
Nice.
Archie Bunker.
Love that.
And I got it, boy. I'll tell you, man. Oh man, that's tough.
Cheers was great.
Cheers. I wasn't much of a Cheers fan, but that's a tough call. You know what? I guess I'll go with Seinfeld. But man, oh man, if you pick, I can't argue with anybody that picks either of the other 2.
Justin,
can I go with Frasier?
Wow.
See, I'm not picking Frasier.
Those 3?
Those 3? As soon as Roy said he didn't like Cheers, I'm like, well, he's not going to like Frasier.
You know what that's like, Roy? That's like throwing out Mays, Mantle, and Duke Snyder and going off the board.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, of the 3 you listed, Mike, I would definitely say Seinfeld. That's probably the greatest show about nothing, followed close behind by Curb Your Enthusiasm. But
yeah.
To me, Frasier is the best show. Well, I guess that's not this century, so I can't even use that as my answer.
Well, Seinfeld was last century too.
That's true.
Yeah.
So then I'll stick with Frasier. I think that's probably
Wow. Off the board style right there.
Yeah, one of my favorite TV comedies. That is.
You know what? I got
to pick. You know what? You said Duke Snider, Willie Mays, or Mantle, and he picked Gil Hodges. How about that?
He picked. I don't know. I'm trying to think of Jimmy Fox, but that was way before that. So yeah. I don't know. Good. You know what though? That's why we do podcasts. Yeah, I got to say this, guys. The '90s for me, I anchored the 11 o'clock shows a lot, so I didn't see a lot of Seinfeld. So it's not like ingrained in me. I love Curb Your Enthusiasm. I think it's died off a little bit. Last year wasn't as good. But my daughter is old enough now where we watch The Office on Netflix, and I've realized that I didn't see a lot of The Office episodes. I love The Office. I'm going to pick The Office. I love everything about The Office, and the only thing I need to really see is I heard the British version is funnier, and I need to see some of that.
You know, I've heard that too, and I've seen. I think I saw one British version, and I didn't think it was as good, but really? I've heard that argument too. The reason I didn't pick The Office was I thought, and I was a big Office fan, and I mean, and I don't watch a lot of TV sitcoms because I think most of them are pretty bad and stupid.
Right.
But certainly watched all three of those on a regular basis. The Office, I think at the end, it was carried by the love story. Okay.
I love Andy Bernard though. The Nard dog was the best.
Yeah. But you know, they kept introducing new characters, which kept it interesting. But I'll tell you what, man, you will not be doing yourself a disservice in any way if you go out and get the entire Seinfeld collection, the library of Seinfeld, and just watch them, because you know what, you're kind of lucky. You didn't see them all. You know, I've seen them all 3 or 4 or 5 times or a dozen times. So when they come on, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this. And you wait for a moment where you know you're going to laugh, and that's it. Same with The Office, and pretty much same with Curb Your Enthusiasm. But for you, man, if it's all new to you, man, you got a special treat waiting for you.
I'll take you up on that. To bring this whole podcast full circle, Eli Manning's favorite show was Seinfeld, and one of the famous stories in the Manning family was Eli Manning had a high school football game. I don't know if you guys have heard this, but it was probably an hour before kickoff. Archie Manning told me this one time. I've heard him tell other people. I used to work with him doing preseason games, and Archie Manning was at home getting ready to go to the game, and Eli calls. He goes, "Hey, Dad, I just want to make sure that you DVR Seinfeld tonight." Eli not as locked in as big brother Peyton. I don't think he's
apparently not. Bucs have to hope he's not locked in too much on Sunday.
That's right. Well, that's the perfect way to end our Few Extra Bucs, and a Frasier reference as well from Justin Thomas, our voice of reason. That was good stuff. That's one of our better podcasts. I love that from top to bottom. I'd like to thank our title sponsors, House of Brews and Sea Dog Brewing Company. Great brews, great food, great service. Remember, check out our video preview every week on pewterpirates.com. Please subscribe. It's free. But this has been another rendition of A Few Extra Bucs. For Justin Thomas and Roy Cummings, I am merely Mike Nabors. Enjoy the game this weekend, Bucs fans.